Warning! The following contains human bodies, because you have to be able to see what people look like in order to draw them. It's not nudity, but they are scantily clad, unitards, underwear, things like that, so if you think that's icky, then I suggest you click away. One thing that hasn't changed much since I was a kid is how impressive everybody finds it when you can draw. The simple act of turning lines into an illusion of 3D form or a recognizable character creates an opportunity for expression, storytelling, and the exploration of ideas that were once simply idle thoughts, now made physical by the simple act of marking a piece of paper. I was very interested in drawing as a middle schooler, and there were a handful of things that I could draw well, but I wouldn't say that I actually became a student of illustration until about 3 years ago. And since then, I have come to realize that drawing is not only an art form to master, but also a practical skill that can be honed by studying dedicated techniques. If you've ever spent any time illustrating, then you know that one of the most challenging things is finding and illustrating that perfect dynamic pose. So today what we're going to do is we're going to look at some different techniques used by industry professionals from around the web so that we can find the perfect pose for your character, otherwise known as gesture. Josiah Allen Brooks, aka Jazza, is a YouTube content creator and animator that got his start in the early days of the internet in the sometimes controversial realm of Newgrounds.com. Jazza starts his video about dynamic figure posing by emphasizing the use of reference, or copying a pose from a photograph.
There is no shame in copying.
He especially likes this technique for beginners, but also mentions that the artist should attempt to go beyond the pose to create greater interest for themselves. Next, Jazza suggests the use of construction or construction lines in order to create a map of how the figure will bend and contort, and doing so before putting on any real anatomical detail, in order to allow the artist to experiment with the pose and then fleshing out the image into a more recognizable silhouette once these details have been sussed out. The greater anatomical details are created by isolating each individual part of the body and identifying which simple geometric shape it is represented by, be it a cylinder, a cube, or a sphere. In contrast to many other artists, Jazza cautions us not to overcommit to flow lines, which are also called lines of action. And basically what they are a starting point for your construction lines that give an idea of the ratios between like where the head is and where the foot is, the way things are going to swing. It's supposed to show overall movement, but he finds them a little confusing and difficult to incorporate into his gesture drawing. But exactly what that is and how to use it better is something we're going to cover in the next segment. HowToDrawComics.net is an online guide for all things comic book illustration. Their online crash course for figure drawing emphasizes the fundamentals, starting with the simple shapes that will make up the anatomy, as mentioned before, the cube, the cylinder, the sphere. They go so far as to suggest that your warm-up be putting out a perspective grid and then sketching some of these shapes along with shadow effects. Next, the article focuses on a few higher concept ideas about how to construct your pose. These concepts are balance, contrapposto, twist, foreshortening, silhouette, and flow, or line of action. Having all of those new vocabulary words thrown at you may be a little intimidating, but thankfully the guide puts each concept into very simple terms. For now, however, let's talk about their emphasis on flow when compared to Jazza. So unlike Jazza, this article actually suggests the use of flow lines or lines of action in order to fill out the anatomy of the subject. Instead of the geometric shapes that we would normally use, they use these things called rhythms. And they're essentially C curves, S curves, and straight lines that are used to find the volume of the character itself. And if any of that sounds confusing to you, don't worry, it confuses me too, and to be honest, I'm not 100% on board with it, but we're going to find out a little bit more after I experiment with it. Jessica Karpyshyn, or Jess Karp for short, is a YouTube content creator and Fashion Institute of Technology alumni who graduated with a BFA in illustration and has been featured in publications such as Creative Quarterly and Infected by Art. In the example we will be looking at today, Jess promises you will be able to draw any pose in 1 minute after using her technique. Jess's approach is a pretty tactile one. She puts a lot of emphasis on the physical conditions of your illustration. She wants to make sure that her space is clear, that her tools are laid out, and she also wants to make sure that she has her pad angled toward her. She said that you could kind of do this in your lap or angle it this way, but in the video she uses an easel, and I happen to have one lying around that I never used, and I actually really like it. It's something that I have a bad habit of doing is I draw from the wrist too much instead of allowing my strokes to come from the elbow and shoulder, and I gotta say that it was an improvement. Her overall technique for mastering pose is refinement through repetition. This tutorial serves as a series of drills that are more akin to a traditional art school experience, with lots of timed drawing exercises. It is important to note that Jess also suggests the use of flow and rhythm rather than geometric shapes, in the interest of both speed, as well as allowing the artist to remain loose and less focused on perfect lines. So after experimenting with all three techniques, I would have to say that my style really falls more in line with Jazza. I prefer the geometric shapes and being able to use construction lines to make decisions about what I'm going to do ahead of time. Instead of trying to do big picture stuff, I like to have control over the little details. I'm just not a fan of lines of flow. Let me emphasize one more time that there are no rules to this. What is correct is whatever works for you, whatever gets you to the point where you're creating things that you're happy with. I know what techniques I'm comfortable with, and so I'm probably going to use those along with the easel, which I really did like. And if there's anything that you're curious about incorporating into your techniques, you can check the description below and you'll find links to everything we talked about today. Okay, happy drawing.